Um, Mr. Laverty began his law enforcement career as a Chicago police officer, becoming familiar with street drugs and often dealing directly with addicts and users. Furthering his law enforcement career, Mr. Laverty became a special agent for the DEA. His assignments included several domestic offices as well as working overseas, mainly in South America, rising through the ranks and retiring in 2022 as an assistant regional director for the Southern Cone region based in Brasilia, Brazil. Mr. Laverty holds a master's degree from the University of Chicago. His thesis, The True Origins of the War on Drugs, illuminates the depth of the drug epidemic in America. So, and then just from my own personal connection with you, Jim, I got to meet Jim when we were at a training together just this past March in DC. And we had a couple of really great conversations. Really enjoyed visiting and hearing about some of his DEA experience and then kind of like comparing notes on some of the training we were receiving in investigation. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today, Jim, and I think everybody will enjoy it.
Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and it was great having the training with you for 2 weeks, Claire. I really enjoyed it, and our conversations as well, and our little surveillance exercise. We had a lot of fun. So I'll share my screen. Let's see. I go back here to Zoom, share screen, and share. I'll hit F5. I learned that yesterday. Oh, it's not working.
I do see a slide. It's not sharing the full screen yet, though, is it?
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
How's it look there?
So there, it looks good.
All right.
I think, can everybody else see it okay?
So again, I'm glad to be here and talk about drug recognition for private investigators. I think it's important for your safety if you come across people who are on drugs. They may act erratically or perhaps dangerously, and it's important to know what drugs they might be using, because there could be a secondhand effect, and you could actually be a victim of an overdose yourself. So those are two of the main things I want to cover in this presentation. Again, the main purpose is to make your job safer and then more effective. You can be aware of drugs you might encounter out there or people on drugs. So,
Jim, really quick, just
sure.
I'm gonna mute myself, but I forgot completely to say that if anybody has questions, you can raise your hand in the middle. Jim told me beforehand he's fine with questions throughout, as long as we don't get off topics on rabbit trails too far. But you can send it through chat if you want. I'll keep an eye on that, and kind of, periodically we can do questions, and then there'll be time at the end as well.
I definitely like to have a more discussion-based presentation. I'm glad to do it. So I chose three main illicit drugs to talk about: synthetic opioids, which is mainly fentanyl, and then cannabis or marijuana, and cocaine as well. So I broke it off at these three drugs, and it's important to note that these are prevalent or widely abused and dangerous at the same time. So there's obviously a lot of debate in our country about marijuana policy. Is it, how dangerous is it? But certainly widely abused. So I think it's both widely abused and dangerous. So I'm including it. And I want to stick with illicit substances. As a retired DEA agent, that's more my background. And a lot of critics would say, well, what about alcohol? And certainly in my law enforcement career, and especially as a police officer in Chicago, I dealt with a lot of harmful effects of alcohol, DUI, deaths, violence. So alcohol is an extremely dangerous substance in our society. I don't know much about alcohol policy, though, so we're not going to cover that. So I'll move on to the next slide. We'll go. So I think before we get into fentanyl, and which is a synthetic opioid, I want to give some background. What is a natural opioid? A natural opioid refers to something that starts with the poppy plant. And from the poppy plant, if you see the bulbs with some, they're scored, and there's a gum that comes out. So the way it's cultivated is they grow them, and about twice a year, the bulbs fill up with sap, and that's an opium. And then the farmer will go by and score the bulbs, and then the sap oozes out, and they scrape it up, and that becomes an opium gum or latex. And then that's the raw ingredient for making morphine. Before morphine was first synthesized around the middle of the 19th century, and prior to that, opium gum itself could be used as an edible or smoked, and it's around for thousands of years, and helped civilizations with their with whatever medicine they had at the time, and pain relief throughout the ages. In ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, they used opium and harvested it. The middle picture in that tray, that's a tray of morphine. So in a laboratory process, or you can have a clandestine process, say in Afghanistan or something, or Mexico or South America. They have cooks, they'll call them, and it goes through a process, and they convert opium gum or latex into morphine. And then once they have that morphine base, they can turn it into heroin. And that's the little packets there. It's typical of how heroin looks. Most heroin could be injected or smoked in the United States. It's you can also snort heroin. So today, 80% of the poppy cultivation in the world comes from Afghanistan still, and then the rest of it's kind of distributed among, like, say, India, parts of Southeast Asia. The Golden Triangle is like Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and then Colombia still cultivates poppy to turn into heroin. So that's the morphine. As I said, that's a pain reliever, and it causes your body to release its own opioids to create a pain relief effect, which is obviously in many medical ways is beneficial. And heroin that came about, I have to look it up, but somewhere around the turn of the 20th century, it's twice as powerful as morphine, but there's an added element to it that it can bring some sense of euphoria to some of the users. So then that kind of adds to the addictive quality of the drug. Synthetic opioids are substances that are synthesized in a laboratory, and that could be a pharmaceutical grade laboratory, or it could be a clandestine laboratory. And they act on the same targets as the natural substance, morphine or heroin, but it's synthesized in a laboratory. And oxycodone, I believe, was the first one synthesized, and is also around the turn of the 20th century. That was in Germany. They did it because they had lack of access to the natural opium gum, which was controlled in areas by the British. So they came up with a synthetic way of having pain reliever, and the Germans were the most advanced in pharmacology in that time period. So they produced oxycodone, and you don't need, basically, a synthetic opioid. You don't need that. You don't need to start with that basis of the plant material, which is the opium gum. They through advanced pharmacology and use of electron microscopes and chemistry, et cetera, they can synthesize a molecule that is based on the morphine molecule. I'm sorry, the opium molecule, and they work around the basis of morphine and opium to create other synthetic drugs that have other purposes, like time release, or they can be more powerful in their pain and the pain relief than the natural substance, but at the same time they're more addictive. Heroin is about 2 times as powerful as morphine, and fentanyl is 50 times as powerful as heroin. In the you can see a picture of a fake oxycodone and then authentic oxycodone, and it looks about the same. And the difference is that the fake oxycodone is going to have most likely fentanyl in it, or some analog, some closely related drug like fentanyl. And it's made, so the fentanyl itself is probably made clandestinely. And then when it's pressed into tablets with some other inert substance, the measurement of how much fentanyl is in there is the problem, because fentanyl can be so lethal in such tiny quantities. So what's sold on the streets is it's just not measured scientifically, and it's not safe. They're playing a game of Russian roulette when they're buying this on the streets. So that's what's fueling the overdose deaths in the United States today. Any questions before I go on? All right. So,
Jim, I have a question real quick, actually. I was trying to get myself unmuted slowly.
problem.
Is fentanyl, is it always something that's produced and sold illicitly, or is there a by prescription version of it?
So there's it's a fantastic drug. It's by prescription. It's a fantastic drug in the sense of how powerful it is as a pain reliever, and it's great for burn patients. I mean, well, I characterize it as great, or it's so awful to be a burn patient or a cancer patient. And there could be fentanyl patches that do a time release. So somebody can, who's got some chronic pain, can place the fentanyl patch on, and then they get time release and they get relief. So under proper medical care through doctors and pharmacies, and these pain relievers can really improve people's lives and help people a tremendous amount. So, but it's that, so it's produced, and I can't remember when. I just say maybe 1980 is a good kind of a guess. I don't want to look it up, but whenever they produce fentanyl, then it's out there, and it can be mimicked by clandestine laboratories and underground scientists. And that's what's happening, is they take that fentanyl molecule and they'll make either a replica or actual fentanyl or something very close to it. And its effect is it's not measured scientifically. They might not make it properly. It could be very dangerous for its users. The fentanyl epidemic, we have over 100,000 deaths today. That's why I think it's important to really go over this problem with you. The epidemic is out of control. It might have crested. I was looking at the numbers. We might have reached a kind of a leveling off. I hope so. I hope we turn a corner and start to have the numbers go down. But it's a leading cause of death, fentanyl overdose for people between 18 and 45. About 2/3 of the deaths, overdose deaths you see in that chart, they're driven by fentanyl. And opioid overdose deaths are up by 400% since the year 2000. I kind of want to go over the progression of how we got here. How do we get to this stage where we have so many fentanyl deaths? Or what was historically, just go over it briefly, just to give some background. So morphine was used widely during the Civil War. And after the Civil War, with the use of syringes, which came about during the Civil War, there were a number of addicts addicted to morphine. And then when heroin came about, heroin became more prevalent, say in the 20th century. So it like a small but steady, relatively small but steady percentage of hardcore heroin addicts. And that's where the term junkies came from, was in the cities. They're just going around just trying to scrape up any amount of money per day just to either get morphine, which at that point was also in pill form, or heroin. And then, so the heroin market did grow steadily during the 20th century, and the supplier countries kind of changed. It was Southwest Asia for a while, and then during the Vietnam War, unfortunately, there were instances of heroin being smuggled into the United States from Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and then Mexico started to produce what's called black tar heroin, but they have their own form of poppy plants, which are not indigenous to Mexico. And they started to produce heroin in the 1970s, 80s. And then Colombia picked up on it. Colombia was, starting to export a lot of cocaine to the United States, was growing and growing. And initially Colombia was exporting cocaine to the United States directly, say Miami was a typical port. And then they said, the heck with it, we'll just broker with the Mexicans and Mexican cartels. And then Colombia was selling a great deal of cocaine to Mexico directly, say by the 1980s, 1990s. And then Colombia picked up on the heroin market itself and started growing more and more poppies in the Andes Mountains and creating heroin. And simultaneous to this, around the 80s, 90s, there was a movement to say, okay, we're going to, the medical industry expanded their sales of synthetic opioids, pharmaceutical painkillers. And I think there was a mixture of good intentions and also profit motives, which are not always a bad intention, but they marketed aggressively OxyContin, that kind of substance, and then it created a lot of abuse. There's something called, we refer to as pill mills, where you had unethical doctors that would prescribe, easily prescribe just 300 tablets or so at a time, and then people would go to these clinics, get the prescriptions, and then go to unethical pharmacies and just fill them, and then that was their form of money. And it devastated communities, especially in the South and some of the poor communities in our country. And that created this market for the pills. And then a number of states attorneys general sued the big pharma and won large settlements, multi-billions of dollars in long-term payouts and penalties. And then doctors changed their practices to a degree, and that was more. It was better regulated. We're in a better regulated environment today for the pharmaceuticals, but with the market for pills, painkiller pills out there, drug traffickers started producing counterfeit pills, and they picked up on. There was a time period where, with the heroin market, if you took a kilo of heroin, you could infuse. Let's say you had a kilo of heroin that is mostly pure, and if you added fentanyl to it, you could add. You could make it easily 3 or more kilos of substance to sell and market it as heroin. And if it's $60,000 a kilo or something, the profits just went up immensely. So initially, the fentanyl was being used as a way to expand their sales in heroin and profitability in heroin. So for a while, say 20 years ago or so, Mexico was producing fentanyl illicitly in laboratories in Mexico, but then China picked up on it, and China started producing in a lot of different thousands, some people say, in clandestine labs in Mexico. And then the fentanyl would go from China to the United States through intermediary countries by parcel. And it was very difficult, and it's still going that way. So a package coming from China might look suspicious, but there are brokers or people in between, say in Europe or other parts of the world, they'll accept a package of fentanyl from China, and then they ship it to the United States. It gets shipped to the United States, say in a number of multi-ounce quantities. In the United States, it accumulates, believe it or not, it accumulates on our border, and they'll move fentanyl from the United States into Mexico to put into these pills and then export them greatly. So it's an interesting part of the chain of distribution. There's actually a link there that'll go from the United States into Mexico. And that's kind of the distribution route. Any questions on that aspect of it before I move to the next? What you got?
Okay, well, there was a back question that I missed, just
Sure.
came through as you were kind of like starting the next section, but Andres for with Matt sitting over there, I think, that's Matt, right? Had wanted to know how we can tell the difference, and I think that must have been between like the counterfeit OxyContin or oxycodone versus the regular one.
So I think the differences are so slight, the imperfections are so slight. I wouldn't try to. I would just say that if it's somebody you suspect as being a user, then you can predict that it's probably a counterfeit pill. Or obviously in your own life or your family's life, just only stick to reputable pharmacies. And then when the painkillers, when you're done using them, just you take them back to the, like Walgreens has a box you put them in or something. But if there's any doubt whatsoever, like what source it comes from, never accept it from a friend, even family members. Just get it yourself from a pharmacy, and if it's lying around, done with it, just discard it. Don't leave it lying around. But I would assume that any pill that doesn't come from that direct, very reputable method, then I would assume that it's counterfeit.
Yeah, that's helpful. And then I had, and yeah, it does look like that answered the question. Wanted to just, because I'm not sure if you're seeing the chats, but I think this is good to just mention that one of our attendees said that she had a daughter die of an overdose from fentanyl 9 months ago, and she's
Oh,
attending. Yeah, so sorry, Teresa, that sounds really tough.
I'm so sorry. I
Like
don't
that.
see the chats, but I'm so heartbroken by that. I hate it. I hate how this progressions come, and my heart goes out to you, and thank you for joining here. And I wish there was more that had been done and can be done in the public policy sector to prevent such deaths. And it's utterly heartbreaking. So
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's really rough. I've had some interaction with some of this stuff in my own family. So I understand the worry, the concern that comes along with it.
yes.
I had one other question myself, is just about these brokers that would send packages in, parcels in. Was
Yes.
it like, were they clustered in any particular place or just everywhere?
Western Europe, any place that they could make it seem like it's a package that wouldn't be suspicious to customs coming in the United States.
Okay.
So some of the signs of users of fentanyl or opioids is if you encounter somebody when you're working, they can't focus. They may have very constricted pupils. They may start to lack hygiene and not care so much about hygiene, and they're just focused on obtaining the drug on a daily basis. When I worked in a heroin task force and we would go do surveillance, I'm a big coffee drinker, and I hate to make this sounds trite, this kind of example, but what I came to learn was that an opioid addict will need their fix in the mornings. Like they can get through the night, sometimes they suffer, but they got to get up and get going, and they got to go get that fix in the morning. So that becomes a daily need for them. And then they may need it again in the afternoon. So signs of overdose with opioids they have a limp body, a pale, clammy face, they get blue nails, because what happens is when they ingest too much opioids, if they're starting to overdose, their respiration slows way down. They're not getting enough oxygen, and that would explain the blue nails. You may hear gurgling um, if they can't be awakened. And the thing to do is to call 911 and then use naloxone or Narcan. And I'll get into that in the next slide. But any quick questions before I move to the next slide? So this is what's important for you as investigators, is that if you're investigating someone who's potentially a drug user, and if you're going through their materials somehow, I don't know if you're getting their documents or their car, you want to be sure not to come in contact with any of the drug packaging or the drugs. Make sure you use gloves, and avoid it as much as possible, because you can get a secondary drug overdose through absorbing the material through your skin, or if it gets on your skin and you touch your face, it gets into your mucus. It's just, or you can inhale it accidentally. It only takes a tiny amount to be a lethal dose of fentanyl. So I recommend people carry naloxone, and to carry two. I carry two with me. So you could make a mistake, because we don't administer naloxone on a daily basis, right? So you want to put it right in the nostril. You can see how that officer is getting it. She is going through an overdose, and her life is saved here through naloxone. But similar to like a sinus spray, remember that used to be used more often. But place that in the nostril, and you press. There's a button. You just press and push it right in, and it blocks the effects of the opioids. And people tend to wake up. So you give one dose, and then wait a few minutes. And if they're not fully awake, give a second dose of naloxone to counter the effects of the opioid overdose. And again, I recommend two, because it might take two doses, and then the second thing isn't a panic, since each one only comes with one dose. So if you open a package and you think you're trying to figure out how to use it, you may inadvertently use the dose, and then it's not usable anymore. So I recommend carrying two doses. Any questions on this part?
Yeah, is the risk of accidental, I said ingestion, but I just meant like overdose via
Ingestion, right?
contact. Is that just fentanyl, or is it others too? Like if you come in contact with other high-powered?
I think the risk is for death, I think is basically fentanyl. I think it would take more of the substance. So the thing is, and we'll get into it in the cocaine slide, but so much cocaine has fentanyl in it that someone could say, "Oh, that's cocaine," or it's a known cocaine user, and that user may not even know that there's fentanyl in it. So I would use the same level of precaution. But it's as far as I know, it's the main substance that could lead to an overdose death inadvertently.
We have another from Matt. What's the side effect of when we get exposed, and how long do we have to use the Narcan before the drug becomes fatal?
Well, I think it depends on how much is in their system. So the side effect, like what do we start to notice in ourselves? If is sleepiness, slur, can't focus, can't stand. So in law enforcement, like we look for our partners. If we see something like they're starting to slur, and their pupils become pinpointed, they could be going through an overdose episode. And there's really no harmful side effect to the Narcan. So if you think they might be overdosing, then just administer it. Good. Marijuana. So and I laugh just because there's so much debate, and it is a very serious topic, because it's so prevalent in our society today, and it's a quasi legal drug. It's legalized to some degree in 24 states. There's a perception that it's legal. It's not legal. It's still a Schedule I drug federally, and they're in the process of moving it to Schedule III, which is steroids or Schedule III drug. But I'm including it in this list because the cannabis or marijuana that's being cultivated today, the majority of it, whereas in the past it would come from Mexico or other parts of the world, the majority of it today is being cultivated in our own country. A lot of it California, out west, and they're between the process that they're cultivating it and the seeds they're using, it's much more potent than it used to be. And so there was recently a Danish study that showed that, and it was like a 20-year, they look at 20-year period of males who were heavy users of marijuana. And what they concluded was that of the users of marijuana, 30% developed schizophrenia who otherwise wouldn't have developed schizophrenia. I think that mental health episodes and schizophrenia, can be brought on by the usage of marijuana in people who already have pre-existing, tendencies towards mental health issues or schizophrenia. It doesn't help, but it can also induce schizophrenia in people who otherwise wouldn't get schizophrenia, and it can lead to psychotic episodes, which can lead to very violent episodes when people go psychotic. There's in the national news. There's one case. It was in California. It happened in 2018, but the woman was just sentenced. But her name is Bryn Specker, and her boyfriend Chad O'Malia. That's who's pictured there. They had just started dating, just only a matter of weeks, and he invited her to his condominium. He had some marijuana, and she used marijuana that later was tested. It turned out not to be laced with anything. A lot of pro-marijuana proponents will say, well, the drug was laced with something. That's what caused it. So no, this drug wasn't laced with anything. She smoked the marijuana and ended up stabbing him over 100 times. She stabbed herself, stabbed her dog. She barely remembers it. And he died. He died a miserable death, being stabbed so many times. And then she was just given community service and probation. So that's a controversial sentence. But that's an instance where she used marijuana, became violent. There's other instances. There was one in 2014 in Australia, a woman named Raina Thanaday, who killed 8 children after being a heavy user of marijuana. She had existing mental health issues, and then she was a heavy user, daily user of high potent marijuana. And just a couple of months ago, there was a man named Christian Soto in Rockford, Illinois, who smoked marijuana with his friend. He went on a killing rampage, killed 4 people, injured 7, breaking into homes, using a bat, using a knife. And that happened on March 27th. And there's scant national press on it. And it's not reported very widely, but there is a link between heavy usage of high potent marijuana and psychosis and violence. And I know critics, they really dislike hearing that and want to debate. But I bring it up because the objective is for you to be safe. So if you're going to be investigating someone who's a heavy user of marijuana, you should know that there's also an element of potential violence that comes from the person. In addition, signs of heavy usage of marijuana, their eyes are red, their responses are slow, they're not focused, and they may not answer your questions so coherently. there's cognitive decline with the use of marijuana, especially if they're on it at that time. The active drugs stay in the fatty tissue, especially fatty tissue in the brain, and they're cognitively impaired over time with the usage of marijuana. So it might affect your interviews, and we're dealing with people on marijuana. Any questions on the marijuana slide?
What's the little, if you can explain the picture below, I see a bunch of loose leaf and
So
some plug-like things.
that's what it looks like. So that's how it's packaged. That's when they cut it off the plant, it dries somewhat. And that's typically how it looks, like when it's packaged for sale. And the cigarettes, they roll it in the cigarettes. That's how they smoke it. So that's something you might see either in the garbage or in their cars or on them as a marijuana user.
Okay, is it sometimes brown or is it always green?
No, it could be brown. It depends on how dried out it is.
Okay. So is there ever any like I'm trying to remember because I think I did run across something. It almost looked like a cigar, old cigar, but more loose, like something had been packed together in brown.
So one of the and they call it a blunt. So marijuana users will buy a cigar and empty out some of the tobacco and then
Stuff it
add,
in.
yeah, so then they get a tobacco and
Mhm.
marijuana smoke effect.
Okay, a couple other questions come
Sure.
through over here. Matt asks, should people who are bipolar treat themselves with marijuana? And then something after that, he said purple, which might be to do with the color question.
So those two parts. So just in researching or just reading articles and short-term studies, or not, but the abstracts of studies in preparation for this, what I gather is that people who already have underlying mental health issues, marijuana is not the substance for them. It makes it worse. There's no instance where they have some kind of like bipolar, and then like it helps them with it. I think in the long term, I think it makes them more manic, from what I read. Right. So, and so maybe there's some short term gain from it. Maybe it helps them calm down or something. They might think it's a positive, but I think in the long term, it just adds psychosis, and if people, it triggers psychosis, and if people already have underlying mental health issues, that it doesn't help it. And then the purple kush. So there's a variety of marijuana that I think is mostly made indoors, or it could be made outdoors, but it has so much THC kind of the way that it's cultivated and grown, and the seeds obtained, and they really tend to these plants, and the buds come out so dripping with the resin that has the THC, the active ingredient in it, that it actually has a purplish hue to it, and that's a very potent marijuana strain that has a high THC content. So it's desired by people who use marijuana. They like the effect, and it's worth a lot of money per pound, and they make a lot of profit from it. But it's not, and it brings. So I call it a dangerous drug because someone who uses that level of potent marijuana, like purple kush or something, so maybe they don't have a negative outcome like right then and there, maybe, but chronically over time, it leads to cognitive decline, shaving IQ points, other mental health issues that I think it should be at least as a public policy to have education on it. And most of the messages we get are that it has some health benefit or something. So I think that there's space for a very limited and rare circumstances where marijuana can be beneficial to someone's health. If they're a cancer patient, and so if the other drugs, like the pills for inducing inducing appetite if they're not useful. If they're under chemotherapy, for example, and they're not getting enough nutrition, and there's a way to smoke marijuana. They have these vaporizer machines. If they can do that under doctor's care, it's a minimal risk of psychosis based on the strain they buy. I can, I'm a reasonable person. I think that that's a rare circumstance where it could be used. And I think there are some oil, like CBD oils and things, where it's anecdotally hasn't been proven in a laboratory yet, but it can reduce seizures in people. I think there's potential, and the federal government is opening up the avenues for more and more research. So the plant's been around for thousands of years. It's been a pharmaceutical plant for in the family, just not a scientific, not modern pharmacology, but historically has been used for different cures, or so there's potential perhaps for legitimate medical use. But I think by and large, there's not much legitimate medical use that's out there. And I think that it's mostly marketed, sold, and as an idea for profit. And I think that there's some governments that have just, they thought maybe they could balance their budgets or bring in more tax revenue through marijuana, which I think is very short-sighted given the harm that the drug actually causes.
And then Pat asked, do you believe in your experience that marijuana is a gateway drug to more involved drug use?
So that's a great question. In my experience, they're usually, so just logically, so usually heavier drug users also used marijuana, and also at an earlier stage. So, and I know the critics will say, well, just because someone uses marijuana doesn't mean they're going to jump to cocaine or something. But so I don't know whether it is a cause for people using harder drugs. I don't think many people who are drug users start off with using cocaine. So in a way, it is a gateway drug. Perhaps they break down the barriers of fear. They learn how to get a drug illicitly, and then they've already opened that door, and perhaps they go to the next level in that sense of drug users to try other drugs. So I think it's possible, but it doesn't automatically mean that someone who uses marijuana will move on to heavier drugs. I dispel the notion. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and there's kind of like a notion, well, using marijuana is a kind of rite of passage. Young kids go to concerts and that's what they do, kind of like drinking or something. I think it's more serious. It might not have been more serious at a time in the past, but given the potency of the drug today and the harmful effects, I think it's more serious than just a rite of passage for young people. I highly recommend they don't do it at all. And it's not, that's not what's happening. It's the opposite. I'm just looking at statistics here. 1 in 3 people 18 to 25 in the past year have used, and then 29% 19 to 30 in the past 30 days have used marijuana. And then in an older crowd too, 35 to 50 years of age, 17% in the past 30 days. I think that's alarming. I mean, people getting up there in age should maybe start taking their health more seriously, I think. And 30% of people who use marijuana show signs of use disorder.
Do you make any difference between like edibles versus smoking in terms of what's dangerous and how it affects people?
So edibles can also induce a psychotic effect. There was a person in 2014, I think it was in Colorado. He was not a usual marijuana user, and almost out of curiosity or something, they got some edibles, and he took a gummy bear and went into a psychotic episode. And he was a very gentle man, but he ended up shooting his wife, and he wasn't hardly aware of it. I watched that interview. where the detectives interviewed him and was very confused. And so I think edibles, they can also induce the psychosis. Anything else? Marijuana? Cocaine, as you said in the introduction, I worked a lot of years in South America, which is where cocaine is produced. It's mainly 4 countries: Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Peru. And it's still that way to this day. There was a shift in foreign policy against having the U.S. go directly at labs and production and spraying. So the production is up, unfortunately. It's up to record levels. And there's a market for it in Asia that didn't used to exist, in Australia, Africa. And the chart there that's on the right, talking about the total tonnage of production, you can see that it's doubled since 2010. But this is a UN estimate that I think is too low. And the reason I think it's too low is I look at how much was seized, or is being seized in the ports and around the world. And I've read some estimates of 800 tons a year is seized, or 1,200 tons is a high number. So let's just call it 1,000 tons is in the midpoint, based on, because it's hard to actually calculate all the countries. They don't all report. There's not a centralized reporting system for seizures. It's something our government just tried to implement for decades and has not been successful. But let's say that 1,000 tons of cocaine are seized per year. And then the estimate by UN is that the total global production is around, say, 2,400 or so tons. There's no way that we're seizing 1,000 of the 2,400 tons that's produced. I think there's probably, that's why I say you could double it to 5,000 tons. So the usage rate in the United States is pretty steady. It's not exploded like it has in Europe. It's way up. And then especially Western Europe, the UK, the price has come way down. And then in Asia, where it was almost non-existent, the Middle East and other places, it's now becoming more available because of the increased production. So the issue with it, the reason it made the list today, is that cocaine in the United States, now they're throwing fentanyl in it. They're mixing it with fentanyl, again, to increase their profit. So if you have a kilo of cocaine and somebody wants to sell it, break it up into ounces or something, and that's their little livelihood, is to sell cocaine. They can increase their profits by putting milk powder or some other inert product into the cocaine. And then, so what will happen is then there's less drug effect, and their users will say, what's the deal? I'm paying all this money for milk powder. So then they'll add a little bit of fentanyl in there, and then they'll get a drug effect, even though it's not the one they're looking for. But again, there's no quality, there's no product testing out there. So the number of overdose deaths from cocaine is way up because it includes fentanyl. So it's part of the equation that's leading to this overdose epidemic. If you come across people in your work that are on cocaine, they can be very paranoid, fidgety. They have dilated pupils, which means their pupils are big. It's the opposite of fentanyl. Again, they're paranoid, delusional, hyperactive. It'll be hard to question because they'll jump all over the place. And especially if they're trying to be evasive, I've got a little cocaine in there, they'll be even more evasive and hard to nail down in questioning. Any questions on cocaine?
So many. Can you talk to the difference in what people are seeking when they're taking cocaine as opposed to heroin? Or let's just contrast those two, because they're not the same effect, like you said.
No, it's not the same effect. I think so. Cocaine user so the cocaine is an upper. I mean, it's a stimulant, and then they're more alert, and then but it also gives that sense of well-being, kind of euphoria, like they're floating. And the many cocaine users will add cocaine to their social lives. So if they go to clubs, if they party, if they dance, if they're um, they'll enjoy, or they'll try to enjoy cocaine to add to the sense of going out and celebrating with their friends. It it makes them more alert. It pushes them through the night. I'm sure it's no surprise I'm not a drug user, so I'm a very boring person to go out with, because by 9 o'clock I start getting tired. I gotta go to bed. So and I don't dance. So I guess it'd be the cocaine users. They're dancing and they're out partying and they share it with their friends, and that's more like a party drug. Brings upon the euphoria. So that's what they're seeking, is that energy. Some of them, and it kind of leads to the question of addiction. And I'm a social drinker. I like to have a couple of drinks, and I never push it in any dangerous territory. But so the mystery of why some substances are addictive and some people are addicted to some, and other people can use cocaine, say, on average twice a month. So let's say over the course of a year, they'll use it, say, 20 times or something, when they go out with their friends, and then they're not addicted to it. They live otherwise normal lives, But for some people, it rings their bell, so to speak. Like they have to have it, so they want to repeat that experience, and they're drawn to it, and then they become addicted to it. And then they got to have cocaine every day. That's a daily habit. Then it takes over their lives. And similar to alcohol, I enjoy with friends having a beer, two if there's time. Occasionally, not that often, a mixed drink, but I'm not seeking to have that. I'm not to get plastered or to ring any kind of bell. But from what I understand, alcoholics, they have a different experience. And I don't know why it affects people differently. So they're like, oh, I have to soak up that alcohol, and they're drawn to it. And I think it's kind of a mystery as to why some people can be just use a drug casually and not become addicted. But that's what they're seeking. And then the heroin user is seeking an escape. It's a painkiller. It's a euphoria. It's kind of I think they're just, sadly, I think they might have a lot of pain in their lives or something. They're looking for an escape.
So when cocaine is laced with fentanyl, like you alluded to, it's not the same effect, not what they're seeking, but it's a better cut for some reason because it's producing an effect.
So it's at least giving some drug effect to the person that's selling it. Like, okay, here's the product, and if they didn't put the fentanyl in it or any laced with anything else, it would just be weak cocaine, and then the regular cocaine user will notice it. I think probably most cocaine users don't want fentanyl mixed in. I think they're looking for that high that they get from cocaine. Rarely, there's something called a speedball, where it used to be. It's what John Belushi died of. So they'll mix cocaine and heroin together, and it just, I don't know. It's a stimulant and a downer at the same time, and so it creates, I think, just havoc in their systems, and some people will seek that kind of erratic high. At the same time, be like pressing on the brake and the gas pedal all the way to the floor at the same time. It's going to be a heck of a ride, and deadly. But I think that when they're putting fentanyl today with fentanyl added to the cocaine, I think it's more just to try to increase the profits from cocaine dealers, as opposed to someone wanting to have fentanyl mixed in their cocaine.
Andres asks, is crack cocaine just laced cocaine?
So it's a great question. So crack cocaine is, there's still a market for crack cocaine. There's still a user population of crack cocaine. Um, Crack cocaine is you take powder and you go through a very basic process of boiling it with baking soda and cooking it kind of, and then so if you start off with 1 kilo of say 80% pure cocaine, pretty good quality cocaine, then you have baking soda and maybe some other inert ingredients, and then it goes through this boiling. You can even make 3 kilos out of it or so, and then as you strain it and then let it cool, it through that process it goes back to cocaine base, and then you could break it up like a knife or something. You break up the it becomes a hardened yellowy cake kind of a product, and then they break it up, and then the chunks are smokable. So the interesting thing is that um, the powder cocaine that beyond in the clubs or something like that, if it's not the word is stepped on, if it doesn't have too much cut in it, it could be 60% pure, 70% pure, rather pure. But the crack, especially in the crack days, a lot of times it'd be 15% pure, some low purity, 10%, 20%, some low purity because it has all this baking soda into it. Now the difference is that the delivery system um, is that the crack would be smoked in some kind of pipe. There's a metal pipe, and then they put the chunk at the end of it, and then they light. Use a lighter to make the wherever the crack piece is. They heat it up, and then it creates this vapor, and they smoke it. They breathe it in, and it rings their bell because they want to get that cocaine effect up to the brain real fast. It's a fast delivery system. It's a quick high. So if someone is using powder cocaine and they're out for the night and then they use I don't know a couple small hits throughout the night, they have a steady climb. Whereas a crack cocaine user smokes it, it's a quick high and a quick descent. But it's actually less. You might find it funny as a retired DEA agent, but I thought the crack laws and sentencing, I thought it was patently unfair, and I think that's why part of the reason I think we're having trouble enforcing drug laws today is because that was glaringly unfair to have such high sentences for something that's less concentrated. So somebody could have 50 grams of cocaine, powder cocaine, and have probation or something. But if you have 50 grams of crack, you have to go back and look at the table where I think 50 grams could be a minimum mandatory of 10 years. And yet the 50 grams of powder cocaine can make 3 times the amount of crack. And so it's not well thought out. But that's the irony, is that crack is actually much less pure typically than the powder cocaine.
Oh, this is so interesting. Um, if you just see crack, somewhere, you said it looks like yellowy white block, or does it look like different?
So the street dealers that would try to sell counterfeit stuff and make a quick buck and run away, they would break off piece of sheetrock, so drywall. So if you can imagine, it's a pretty good replica, but the sheetrock's all white, but there's kind of a yellowish tint to crack. If you look at it closely, it just has this little bit of a yellow tint to it as in the cooking process.
Huh. Okay, and then last question. I know you don't want to get sidetracked probably forever on questions, but what about, like, I know you're not talking about meth today, but is there a significant difference between a meth user's behavior and somebody who's on crack?
So I think and meth falls, I put it in the category of cocaine because it's a stimulant, it's an upper, and then the meth is it's kind of analogous to the fentanyl in the sense that fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. Methamphetamine is a synthetic upper. Okay, so it's made in a laboratory process, and it's made with chemical ingredients, but it comes from So there's, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's called an ephedra plant. There is a plant material, and I'm pretty sure it's ephedra, and then it has a stimulant quality to it. And then the amphetamine is like a copy of, is based on the ephedra molecule from the plant that is the stimulant. And then the methamphetamine is just the way it's produced. And I'm not a chemist, but it's more easily ingestible and hits the blood-brain barrier. But it's highly addictive, and the production of it with the precursor chemicals coming from China and India going into Mexico. When I was last looking at methamphetamine cases, there was no limit practically to how much methamphetamine the Mexican cartels could produce because the raw ingredients are so readily available. It was just, they were limited more by the transportation of it and sales of it. So it's a frightening drug because of how addictive it is. I've not worked in areas with big meth problems. It's always been heroin, cocaine since Chicago. I worked in Chicago a long time, and cocaine was more preferable to meth. And I understand out west, I think meth is a bigger problem. But it's a similar type of set of problems as cocaine. It's addictive. I think it's probably considered more addictive and more destructive than cocaine.
Thank you. You have time for one more?
Sure.
Andres asks, how does the law view the enhancements of drugs, like laced drugs?
So it's when the drugs are sent into the laboratory and you get a lab report back, you get a list of all the substances. So if, for example, you have, let's say, a half kilo of a substance that's supposed to be cocaine, but it has 100 grams of fentanyl in it, then I believe, I know they can be charged. I think they charge the higher one. So you're going to hit the, even though, you sold a half kilo of what you thought was cocaine to the undercover, it comes back as fentanyl, you're going to be sentenced under the fentanyl guidelines, which is more stringent. They don't get breaks that way. What else?
I think that might be it for the moment. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good
great.
answers.
Thank you. My final slide, I wanted to just showing the money, and I'm showing, how difficult it is to regulate the pharmaceutical market and the illicit drug market, because there's so much money involved. And this chart here, this trend line, that's the number of federal prisoners in prison, and you could see it just going up and up and up through the war on drugs. And then there was a different thought process to try to reprioritize drug investigations and to take away marijuana as a priority for federal cases. And at the same time, people may not realize it, but there's the Drug Enforcement Administration, and then there's ATF and FBI, and back then there was Customs. It became DHS, and then throughout the country there were drug task forces at the county level, state level, and all of these different agencies, state and local, federal, like they've pulled back from drug investigations. It's less number. I don't have the statistics, but I know there used to be big drug task forces and stuff that have dried up. And then FBI is practically out of the business altogether. ATF still will do some cases, DHS, but the effort to investigate drugs has gone down while the problem's gone up. And I think that my opinion is that there's room for criticism for the ways the so-called war on drugs was fought, and the fact that, people that were pretty low in the food chain end up doing a lot of time. And I think we could reform that, and the people at the bottom of the food chain, they should get substance abuse treatment, and but it might have to, if they have other crimes that are concurrent with the drug usage and drug possession, then there should be perhaps mandatory drug treatment. We could look at it that way. While they're in prison or something, let's say they committed armed robbery or other crimes that go along with drug trafficking. And then the lower level drug traffickers, maybe they didn't deserve such a long sentence, but I think the emphasis should be on those interstate traffickers. And I think there should be an increased effort to put serious mid-level and high-level drug traffickers in prison, and it should be a priority to investigate them. And it's hard. People are kind of fatigued from the so-called war on drugs, and I'll get to that in a second. And they say it's been a failure, but given the level of overdose deaths we have, and the amount of harm that our country's going through with the drug epidemic, I hope we get back to that kind of emphasis on tough enforcement and tough prosecution, and incarcerating mid-level and high-level traffickers. I think that the war on drugs, I hate that phrase, and it's inaccurate. And I think with modern pharmacology and then the illicit drug industry that came about starting mostly in the 20th century, I think that we should look at it like it's a new category of crime. We have traditional levels of categories of crimes like murder, rape, robbery, assault, and theft. These are the big umbrellas. I think we should add drug trafficking to that, and then and have as an effort as our country to reduce the presence of drugs and supply of drugs. Supply reduction has its proper place, and that we should have a continuous steady effort to investigate and prosecute drug traffickers. And it should just be a regular part of law enforcement, as opposed to looking at it through the lenses and the framework of, well, there's a war on drugs and it didn't work. Look, we just spent all this effort, and then there's still drugs anyway. Well, I mean, you wouldn't say that any other category of crime. You wouldn't say, well, we've really tried to crack down on the number of auto thefts, and we're tired of it, So your car was stolen, but nonetheless, you'll just have to just call your insurance company. We're not investigating because we're had enough of this car theft. This is a category of crime that's permanent with us, and it shouldn't be framed in terms of like a campaign, a short term or a limited time campaign. And the final thing I was going to say is, so another note of caution when you're investigating is that if you have any information or belief that the person you're investigating is a drug user or even distributor, be careful as you follow the person, because they may be looking for surveillance, and they may think you're the police, or they may think that you're a rival, or maybe they've got a drug debt. So they may not believe they're just being followed for some other civil matter. So it could put you in danger. And then if they drive you into an area where there's drug sales, you'd be very leery of that, because there's lookouts and things. And so they're going to pick up their drugs, but somebody's watching you. You're watching that person, but they'll be watching you, and they might think you're the police or some kind of undercover surveillance or something. So that's just another safety tip as you do your work. But that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. One more question has come through about marijuana. Since legalization in some states, has there been a drop in busts federally?
The drop in what?
Busts, or just like federal prosecution of
There has been a great drop in it, and it was Eric Holder, when he was the Attorney General, wrote a memo just stating that he didn't legalize it, but he said we need to shift our priorities away from marijuana prosecutions. So there are very few federal busts. Sometimes there will be. I think the criteria for DEA is if okay, there's a set of state laws, and believe it or not, the state laws that are written out there, and years ago I read most of them. But it's been a while, so I've been up to date on them. But I know in Virginia, the state law on marijuana distribution is very tight and strict. So people have a sense that it's legal, but really, if they were to read, all the pages of the legislation regarding the marijuana legislation in their respective states, it's still restrictive. It restricts how much can be grown, how much can be sold, and I don't think there's any provision any place for interstate distribution. So all that marijuana that's grown out in California, that's all a violation of federal law. So when there's a heavy amount, a great amount of it, there's violence associated, that'll trigger the criteria for a federal prosecution or state prosecution too. They'll still look at marijuana cases and still prosecute based on circumstances. So it's not exactly legal. It's just not prioritized as much as other crimes.
It's funny to me because when we were out in Virginia for that training,
Right.
I smelled pot constantly, like all over the streets of Old Town, Alexandria. I mean, it was
Right.
just everywhere. So we have some out here. It's Washington's legalized, so we're right across the border in Idaho, or I am right across the border. I can drive 7 minutes and be in Washington State. So kids go from our university over to the neighboring university and pick up their. Actually, we've got a dispensary right on the state line. It's pretty funny. They built it literally. You drive out of town, you're in a wheat field, and there's a
Yeah.
dispensary right there. So
Well, that would be interesting to see, for example, and I haven't looked at the Washington law, but it'd be interesting to look up like, well, okay, so we have a dispensary, but then there's regulations as to how much they can store at a time, how much they can buy at a time, and who they can sell it to is typical in the state laws. They might need to have a letter from a caregiver. I forget how it's phrased, but it's not exactly a prescription from a medical doctor, but they'll cleverly phrase it, that be a registered caregiver or something. So, but they might be violating the law there at the dispensary, or maybe they're limited to say a certain number of grams or however they measure it in that state. And I wouldn't be surprised if they break the laws to fill the dispensary shelves, even break their own state laws, possible.
any other questions, folks? I don't see anything coming through on chat.
Well, great. It's been my pleasure to speak with you guys today. I hope it was informative, and I hope it brings a measure of safety to your work. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate being here. And Claire, I look forward to working with you and talking to you in the future.
For sure, Jim. Really appreciate this presentation. I've got a page of notes, and it sparked all sorts of new questions and thoughts. So
Great.